Anaximenes were natives of Ionia in Asia Minor, which was a stronghold of the Egyptian mystery schools, which they carried on. Sanford's The Mediterranean World, page 195 to 205. Similarly, we are told that Xenophanes, 576 BC, Parmenides, Zeno, and Melissus were also natives of Ionia, and that they migrated to Elea in Italy and established themselves and spread the teachings of the mysteries. In like manner, we are also informed that Heraclitus, 530 BC, and Pericles, Anaxagoras, and Democritus were also natives of Ionia, who were interested in physics. Hence, in tracing the course of the so-called Greek philosophy, we find that Ionian students, after obtaining their education from the Egyptian priests, returned to their native land, while some of them migrated to different parts of Italy, where they established themselves. Consequently, history makes it clear that the surrounding neighbors of Egypt had all become familiar with the teachings of Egyptian mysteries many centuries before the Athenians, who in 399 BC sentenced Socrates to death. Zeller's History, page 112, 127, 170 to 172, and subsequently caused Plato and Aristotle to flee for their lives from Athens, because philosophy was something foreign and unknown to them. For this same reason, we would expect either the Ionians or the Italians to exert their prior claim to philosophy, since it made contact with them long before it did with the Athenians, who were also its greatest enemies, until Alexander's conquest of Egypt, which provided for Aristotle free access to the library of Alexandria. The Ionians and Italians made no attempt to claim the authorship of philosophy, because they were well aware that the Egyptians were the true authors. On the other hand, after the death of Aristotle, his Athenian pupils, without the authority of the state, undertook to compile a history of philosophy, recognized at the time as the Sophia or wisdom of the Egyptians, which had become current and traditional in the ancient world, which compilation, because it was produced by pupils who had belonged to Aristotle's school, later history has erroneously called Greek philosophy, in spite of the fact that the Greeks were its greatest enemies and persecutors, and had persistently treated it as a foreign innovation. For this reason, the so-called Greek philosophy is stolen Egyptian philosophy, which first spread to Ionia, thence to Italy, and thence to Athens. And it must be remembered that at this remote period of Greek history, i.e. Thales to Aristotle, 640 BC to 322 BC, the Ionians were not Greek citizens, but at first Egyptian subjects and later Persian subjects. Zeller's History, page 37, 46, 58, 66 to 83, 112, 127, 170, 172. William Turner's History, page 34, 39, 45, 53. Rogers' Student History, page 15. B.D. Alexander's History, page 13, 21. Sanford's The Mediterranean World, page 157, 195 to 205. A brief sketch of the ancient Egyptian empire would also make it clear that Asia Minor, or Ionia, was the ancient land of the Hittites, who were not known by any other name in ancient days. According to Diodorus and Manetho, high priest in Egypt, 2 columns were found at Nysa, Arabia, one of the goddess Isis and the other of the god Osiris, on the latter of which the god declared that he had led an army into India, to the sources of the Danube, and as far as the ocean. This means, of course, that the Egyptian Empire at a very early date included not only the islands of the Aegean Sea and Ionia, but also extended to the extremities of the east. We are also informed that Senusert I, during the 12th dynasty, i.e. about 1900 BC, conquered the whole sea coast of India, beyond the Ganges to the Eastern Ocean. He is also said to have included the Cyclades and a great part of Europe in his conquest. Secondly, the Amarna letters found in the government offices of the Egyptian king Akhenaten testify to the fact that the Egyptian empire had extended to Western Asia, Syria, and Palestine, and that for centuries Egyptian power had been supreme in the ancient world. This was in the 18th dynasty, i.e. about 1500 BC. We are also told that during the reign of Thutmose III, the dominion of Egypt extended not only along the coast of Palestine, but also from Nubia to northern Asia. Bredstead's Conquest of Civilization, page 84. Diodorus, page 128. Manetho, Strabo, Dicaearchus, John Kendrick's Ancient Egypt, Volume 1. 2. The authorship of the individual doctrines is extremely doubtful. As one attempts to read the history of Greek philosophy, one discovers a complete absence of essential information concerning the early life and training of the so-called Greek philosophers, from Thales to Aristotle. No writer or historian professes to know anything about their early education. All they tell us about them consists of A doubtful date and place of birth, and B, their doctrines, but the world is left to wonder who they were and from what source they got their early education, and would naturally expect that men who rose to the position of a teacher among relatives, friends, and associates would be well known not only by them, but by the whole community. On the contrary, men who might well be placed among the earliest teachers in history, who had grown up from childhood to manhood and had taught pupils, are represented as unknown, being without any domestic, social, or early educational traces. This is unbelievable, and yet it is a fact that the history of Greek philosophy has presented to the world a number of men whose lives it knows little or nothing about, but expects the world to accept them as the true authors of the doctrines which are allowed to be theirs. In the absence of essential evidence, the world hesitates to recognize them as such, because the truth of this whole matter of Greek philosophy points to a very different direction. The book on nature, entitled Periphysios, was the common name under which Greek students interested in nature study wrote. The earliest copy is said to date back to the 6th century BC, and it is customary to refer to the remnants of Periphysios as the fragments. William Turner's history, of Philosophy, page 62. We do not believe that genuine initiates produced the book on nature, since this was contrary to the rules of the Egyptian mysteries, in connection with which the philosophical schools conducted their work. Egypt was the center of the body of ancient wisdom and knowledge, religious, philosophical, and scientific, spread to other lands through student initiates. Such teachings remained for generations and centuries in the form of tradition until the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great and the movement of Aristotle and his school to compile Egyptian teaching and claim it as Greek philosophy. Ancient Mysteries by C.H. Vail, page 16. Consequently, as a source of authority of authorships, Periphysios is of little value, if any, since history mentions only 4 names as authors of it, namely Anaximander, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Anaxagoras, and asks the world to accept their authorship of philosophy, because Theophrastus, Sextus, Proclus, and Simplicius of the school at Alexandria are said to have preserved small remnants of it, the fragments. If Periphysios is the criterion to the authorship of Greek philosophy, then it falls short in its purpose by a long way, since only 4 philosophers are alleged to have written this book and to have remnants of their work. According to this idea, all the other philosophers who failed to write Periphysios and to have remnants of it also failed to write Greek philosophy. This is the reductio ad absurdum to which Periphysios leads us. The schools of philosophy, Chaldean, Greek, and Persian, were part of the ancient mystery system of Egypt. They were conducted in secrecy, according to the demands of the Osirica, whose teachings became common to all the schools. In keeping with the demands for secrecy, the writing and publication of teachings were strictly forbidden, and consequently, initiates who had developed satisfactorily in their training and had been advanced to the rank of master or teacher refrained from publishing the teachings or philosophy. Consequently, publication of philosophy could not have come from the pen of the original philosophers themselves, but either from their close friends who knew their views, as in the case of Pythagoras and Socrates, or from interested persons who made a record of those philosophical teachings that had become popular opinion and tradition. There is no wonder then that in the absence of original authorship, history has had to resort to the strategy of accepting Aristotle's opinion as the sole authority in determining the authorship of Greek philosophy. Introduction to Alfred Weber's History of Philosophy. It is for these reasons that great doubt surrounds the so-called Greek authorship of philosophy. William Turner's History of Philosophy, pages 35, 39, 47, 53, 62, 79, 210, and 11, 627. Ancient Mysteries by C.H. Vail, page 16. Theophrastus, fragment 2. Introduction to Alfred Weber's History of Philosophy.
Remember, this is a
3.
book that you
The
can
chronology
buy.
of Greek
Stolen
philosophers
Legacy.
is mere speculation.
G.M. James. And the book
History
is
knows
better
nothing
than
about the early life and training of the Greek
the
philosophers,
YouTube.
and thus it's true not only of the pre-Socratic philosophers, but also of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who appear in history about the age of 18 and begin to teach at 40. As a body of men, they were undesirable to the state.
When I learned all this, I had to read the book.
Persona non grata, and were consequently persecuted and driven into hiding and secrecy.
There was no
Under
internet.
such circumstances, they kept no records of their activities, and this was done in order to conceal their identity. After the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great, and the seizure and looting of the royal library at Alexandria, Aristotle's plan to usurp Egyptian philosophy was subsequently carried out by members of his school, Theophrastus, Andronicus of Rhodes, and Eudemus, who soon found themselves confronted with the problem of a chronology for a history of philosophy.